Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dawn of Drones podcast. I cannot believe that we are at the end of 2022, and what an incredible year it's been, and it's been quite a journey. In fact, this is our very last episode here on DroneLife channels, and I wanted to give a huge thank you and shout out to Miriam and Harry McNabb, who have been incredible partners for this journey this entire time. So thank you both for that. And what better way to round out the year than with these two incredible folks we've got on the line. We've got Kevin Morris, the drone guy from the FAA, and we've got PK from NASA. So this is becoming a like an annual tradition to end the year with NASA and FAA. So thank you so much for both being here.
Thanks, Don.
So let's
Really excited to be here, Don.
I know you guys are both at your respective headquarters, and hope everybody out there is enjoying the holiday season as we end the year and blast into 2023. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the background of these two gentlemen, because you've all seen them, you heard them, but you may not know a lot about them. So PK, let's go ahead and start with you. Can you give us a little bit, that 30-second elevator bio?
Sure, yeah. Right now, my current job is I am director of NASA Aeronautics Research Institute, who's looking at new trends, technologies that NASA Aeronautics Enterprise should consider moving forward, and things, build partnerships and collaborations with drone industry, advanced air mobility industry, new ideas, and really fun, exciting job I have. I'm really excited, but that's my current role. In addition to that, I am still focused on my personal interest and professional interest related to airspace integration of all types of aircraft and drones. So, of course, happy to be here.
Well, what a great person to have on the show from your vantage point to look back over this past year and to kind of project what we're going to talk about here soon and what might happen in 2023. Kevin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, well, Don, I thought we agreed that I wouldn't have to follow the amazing people from NASA in my introduction. Did I make that clear last year? At any rate, yes, Don, you're correct. I'm the FAA drone guy. To get there was a bit of a winding path for me. I've been with the FAA 16 years. Prior to that, I was an airline pilot. During my time here at the FAA, I've done aircraft accident investigation, airman certification. I've done enforcements and investigation. I was with the field office in Minneapolis. And for about the past 6 or 7 years, I've been dedicated almost entirely to drones, and now drones and AAM, where I've done a lot of work writing policy and regulation, and also now working with the FAA to ensure that we're all speaking the same language when we talk about drones to their stakeholder groups.
All right, well, perfect. And really a perfect segue too, because I want to start with drones. And so let's talk about that a little bit. Looking back on 2022, let's start with you, Kevin. From the FAA's perspective, what would you say as you reflect back on this year, maybe the top 3 developments in the drone industry on the FAA side of the house?
Sure. So kind of hard to pick, really.
Yeah, I know. So many.
Right. In the drone world, it's just there's so many advancements coming along, but I did narrow it down. I think I got a good 3 here. The first one I'm going to mention just happened a few months ago, and that is the remote ID compliance date for manufacturers. So we've been talking about remote ID. Don, I think we even talked about it last year,
Yes.
About it's coming. Well, now it's kind of here. So in September of this year, manufacturers who are producing drones to be sold in the US were required to start producing remote ID equipped drones. So we sort of crossed that first threshold for remote ID. And I'm sure PK is going to talk about UTM at some point, but how remote ID will eventually tie into that system. So it's a big date. Now I have to throw out a caveat, because it doesn't mean you have to start broadcasting remote ID today. That comes next year, and I'm going to save that talking point for later. But I think the remote ID manufacturer compliance date, that was a big threshold that we crossed in 2022. Another really big one.
Can I, Kevin? Before we go on to numbers 2 and 3, was there a little bit of a grace period given to folks as well, like a buffer zone? I know September was the technical compliance date, but then maybe I think a 90-day window to get up to speed, if you will.
Yes, absolutely, Don. That's what we called our enforcement discretion policy. And the reason we issued that notice was because for the means of compliance, which is the technical way of saying how remote ID is going to work, we did not approve the first means of compliance remote ID until about 30 days prior to the September 16th deadline. So in an effort to give manufacturers a little bit more breathing room to make sure they can comply with that means of compliance, we offered enforcement discretion, which said, hey, look, if you're building drones, you're really trying to work well and you're operating in good faith, we are going to let you continue to work towards that manufacturer compliance date of December 16th now with that extension. But there's a few caveats that go into it. So it's not just, we're not going to enforce the rule. We're still enforcing the rule. We're using our discretion for those manufacturers producing in good faith.
All right, gotcha. Sorry to interrupt. I knew that was kind of important. And I also know that there are a couple manufacturers right out of the gate that said, hey, we're good.
Yeah, we're really excited. If you go to our FAA Declaration of Compliance website, that's where you're going to find all the MOCs, the means of compliance, also where you can find out whether or not your drone is remote ID compliant. In fact, that's probably the only place you should go to see if your drone is remote ID compliant. And we're seeing more and more and more drones appear on that page by serial number, make, and model every day. So it's pretty exciting.
All right, awesome. Always lots of great tips from Kevin along the way. So, all right, your number 2 and 3.
All right, let me jump back into recreational flyers because I think this is a really cool thing. We have finally gotten around to releasing Advisory Circular 91-57C as in Charlie. This was a long time coming. In fact, I worked a lot on this advisory circular. So you can tag my email address at the end if people have complaints. But nonetheless, we finally got that advisory circular out, and it explains in full detail how recreational flyers can comply with the congressional statute of 44809. And probably most excitingly attached to that is the fact that we have now recognized our first community-based organization. So as we move forward, we're going to start seeing more and more community-based organizations. So why is that important? Well, one of the requirements of Section 44809 is that you follow the safety guidelines of a community-based organization. Folks flying recreationally can now completely comply with that rule. So that was really exciting. You can go to our website to see how many and which community-based organizations the FAA has recognized. We'll keep that updated in real time.
Awesome.
And then I'll jump to my last one because I think that opens the floodgates for a lot of things. And I'm sure PK is like, when do I get to talk? I think the last
Very patient man.
Yeah, is our BV loss, or Beyond Visual Line of Sight. Aviation Rulemaking Committee sent us their final report earlier this year. So we've been looking at that final report for the last number of months here, and we're excited about that because it's paving the way for future regulatory changes to enable BV loss.
All right, those are a pretty great top 3 you had going there. PK, that's kind of a tough act to follow, but I know NASA has been rocking it this year too. So what would you say are your top 3 this year for drones?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. And it's hard to beat what Kevin said, obviously, but let me take another dimension of this. So a lot of excitement at the global level. So you can see countries like Malawi and Japan and Korea and a lot of European places are adopting UTM. European Union, Eurocontrol has finally put a date for implementation of UTM, including the network USS. So really excited about it. ICAO just published edition 3 of the framework that talks about the basically lessons learned from different countries and all the things that have evolved. So it's a really good update on that. We had tremendous progress. So I'm really excited and very, much basically looking forward to global adoption, of UTM and harmonization across, many places. So that's a really, really encouraging and exciting development. Now we have whole world rallying behind UTM. That's one. Second is in collaboration with FAA, we have UTM field test that's going to happen soon. So that's another exciting thing. So we're trying to get inch by inch closer to operationalization of UTM. as consistent with what has been suggested in the ARC reports. Of course, the rulemaking will decide which pieces go when and how exactly get implemented. The third piece that's really exciting is we have finally come to terms that number of pieces of UTM, which is the cooperative nature, the intent sharing, the digital network, the third-party services, service-oriented architecture, and parts of management by exception philosophy is very applicable to advanced air mobility for scaling. And that's a very good excitement. We are now beginning to demonstrate that through simulations and over a period of time national campaign that, hey, what we learned in UTM is going to now help us get to the other parts, which is really exciting. And FAA, to their credit, in their infocentric NAS concepts, they have started to talk about basically service-oriented architecture. So all in all, I'm really excited about the parts and the learnings of UTM and where they're likely to make a broader impact for airspace.
So it sounds like if I was going to summarize the year for NASA here in the drone arena, it's UTM, UTM, UTM. But I love how you're bridging those lessons learned into advanced air mobility. So I'll stick with you, PK. As you look forward to 2023, you kind of alluded to some things just, that you're just starting with UTM, some of these trials. What are you looking forward to the most in 2023?
Advanced Air Mobility National Campaign, operationalize of UTM, and getting back to basically definition of USS network. Also, some of the learnings and identification of items that have been mentioned in the ARC report, strategic deconfliction, the characterization of services, and the USS unmanned aircraft system service supplier network, which will be the key for scalability as well as interoperability of these vehicles. So I'm looking forward to that in 2023. You will see a lot more action from NASA as well as other entities, partners, and FAA in that direction.
Oh, well, there's so much connectivity between all of these different things. Remote ID, as Kevin said, being a building block to UTM, UTM bridging to AAM. Kevin, I'm going to go back to you. And, we talk a lot about the BVLOS ARC. And as we look forward to 2023, there's been a lot of speculation out there on both sides, the naysayers and the hopefuls, we'll put them, like that some rulemaking or at least some policies may come out of that 400+ page report to help keep moving beyond visual line of sight operations in a more scalable direction. Is there anything you can share with us about what you might expect us to see in that regard in 2023?
Not if I want to keep my job.
Of course.
I think in all seriousness, yeah, absolutely. Don, you hit the nail on the head with that one, that the BVLOS ARC recommendations were huge. That final report that came in, that was extremely important to the FAA. I believe the number was 93 different groups and people were represented on that panel, all from industry, all voicing their opinion on how they feel BVLOS could work. I'll say this right out of the gate, that the FAA recognizes that BVLOS is something that has to happen. It's not a nice to have. It's something that has to be worked into our regulation. I'm going to steal the word that you used, Don, and call it scalable. It's got to be repeatable. It's got to be normalized. It's got to be something like what we're seeing for night under Part 107 and operations over People 107, where the rule permits the operation as long as you can maintain that safety standard. And that's what we're striving towards. Now, historically, if you look at our waivers, BVLOS has been probably the toughest one to get. Maybe followed by ops over people. So it's definitely a segment and type of operation that is challenging, both operationally and technologically speaking. There are a lot of components that have to happen in order for normal, scalable, repeatable BVLOS to happen. But I really do feel that we're going to see this progress continue towards rulemaking here in 2023, based a lot off of what we're learning in that report.
Well, and just kind of as a watcher, if you will, I almost routinely go to the FAA website, to be honest with you. Props, I think it's great. I love your waivers page, very thorough. It seemed like there's been a little uptick in those BVLOS waivers, which is very encouraging, especially over the past year. So I guess, like you said, more to follow, but as these waivers are granted and people continue to prove the safety case, and then of course all the companies working with PK, and NASA on a whole host of things, all of that data I assume is being correlated to validate some of these ideas and to come up with the best practices to say, all right, yes, if you meet this checklist, if you will, you should be okay here, right? So that will be really, really exciting. Kevin, the FAA has done so much in the last 2 years. Last year we spent a lot of time, as you said, talking about remote ID. We talked about the ops over people rule. We talked about the trust test and things of this regard. Is there anything brewing that you can share that might be coming down the pike, BVLOS ARC aside, that maybe we can look forward to?
Well, I'm going to throw this out there, although I don't know if it's something people may be looking forward to, but I think PK and I, and Don, you probably yourself would agree, it's critically important. And that's next September of 2023, when remote ID becomes effective for operators to begin compliance. I think that is going to be an extremely interesting time as we see how a remote ID works. Does it work as we intended? Or the compliance issues like we expected? How is the network capability, if those that want to do network capability, going to work? So I think what I'm excited for is to see what we've been talking about for I don't know how many years now with this remote ID to actually come to fruition. Because as you pointed out, that's going to be one of the very big first cornerstone, if you will, building blocks of UTM. So I think there's a lot of anticipation and hope for remote ID. I think it's a pretty good setup the way we have the regulatory structure. And I think our partnership with NASA on UTM is going to depend on it a lot. So for me, looking forward to 2023, that's what I'm going to be excited about in September.
Well, Kevin, that's the compliance deadline, right, for pilots. But people, if they buy one of these compliant drones before that, could actually start using remote ID in advance of September, just to be clear about that, right?
Absolutely correct. If your drone comes equipped with standard remote ID, or if you've equipped it with the broadcast module, you can start broadcasting a remote ID today. Absolutely right.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some of those stories earlier in the year for people that are already using it, so that by the time we get to September, maybe some of if there are kinks, we can work some of those out. But let's transition to advanced air mobility, because we talked about how so many of these things bridge over to that sector, if you will, that technology, the electric vertical takeoff landing, aircraft, eVTOLs, other. PK, you mentioned the national challenge, national campaign for AAM. That's been going on for a little while, and you've accomplished a lot. So how's that been going? Is there anything that you'd like to highlight for people to just say, hey, during this, we've established ABC so far?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In the initial stages, we have collected really good information on the acoustics data to understand basically what the noise footprint is of the vehicles and the persistence of that. So that's going to help us figure out standards. So that's less of an aerospace research, but it's research that's been done on the aircraft side to understand basically how the community acceptance will come together. And it's a really important aspect. As you know, the helicopters are noisy, and we want to demonstrate these eVTOLs would be magnitude order different. So the data has been collected. So that was part of the earlier tests or campaigns. Now, National Campaign 2, we're still evolving the basically discussions as to what will look like exactly, but there's growing interest. There are more aircraft manufacturers and partners ready in the national campaign than before, which is a really great sign.
Yeah.
Moving forward. Another thing towards advanced air mobility is I'll give a little snippet, and we are looking for, of course, collaborators for national campaign partners. If you're listening, you want to be part of it, send us email. The another one I will say is that we are also taking on a different use case, one for wildland fires, and it's a perfect application of drones and UTM coming together to fight the fires. Here's a really interesting, basically, statistics. Last year, top 5 fires costed about $1.8 billion.
Oh,
and top 3 fires lasted more than 2 months, um, and then all of them lasted for more than a month. And what happens today is that firefighting aerial suppression primarily is confined to good visibility conditions. I was VFR conditions primarily because there is the air boss or tactical air group supervisor sitting in the aircraft watching outside the window and managing the traffic of helicopters and fixed wing aircraft that are doing suppression with water and retardant. Now we want to extend that paradigm to 24 hours a day. UTM in a box and drones outfitted with water and retardant capability, maybe managed remotely in the beginning, but over a period of time autonomously. If we can just imagine if we can extend the paradigm for aerial suppression to 24 hours a day instead of 8 hours a day, that's going to be a game changer. So we are really excited about these use cases of UTM and drones that are evolved to a point where we had not thought about this 5 years ago. If you would have asked me about UTM, I would have never imagined that. But UTM came along. We had a small activity called Stereo as an offshoot of UTM. Then we started to launch this, what I call characterize a second shift idea, where drones will operate when the manned aviators have finished their work and they can't operate anymore under VFR and nighttime conditions. So really excited about building that and bringing the collaborators and partners from aerospace industry as well as the drone industry as well as communication, navigation, GPS denied kind of capabilities, and bring all of that together and say, how do we put this system together and change the paradigm for better, you know?
yeah. Well, PK, I have no doubt you're going to do it. And I say that because it was a different world in 2013. I mean, I'm sure you both remember this is like, before Part 107, right? But that's when I was in the Air Force, and it was at the time the California Rim wildfire. And I was involved in the first approval for the DoD to use a very large drone, a group 4 drone, is the way the military refers to it, with the California National Guard, to provide incident awareness and assessment. And it was the
Yes.
firefighters, PK, and it changed the battle rhythm to a 24/7 operation. And now they didn't have to, I don't think, deconflict the airspace to the extent, once the military's up in the air, people tend to get out of the way. But just for, commercial and local law enforcement and local fire departments, it's kind of a little bit of a different story. But it's been done, and I know we can make this, to tag on to what Kevin said earlier, regularized, for the good of all, and that's so exciting. Your point about acoustics is huge. I'm so glad you're doing this research, because I agree. I think for community acceptance, that is something that people really lock on to. I mean, working at the Air Force Academy, they have these little tiny like glider aircraft. They don't sound louder than a lawnmower in the sky. And, the neighbors come out and pit with pitchforks, like, oh, they're so loud. And it's not even about the noise. It's about a perception. And so much work to be done there. The noise is one aspect, the decibel level, but then it's that subjective aspect that has to be tackled too. So much of that. Kevin, I'm gonna pivot over to you and talk a little bit about the FAA has moved forward on some of this advanced air mobility, standards. I just saw recently a draft notice of public rulemaking that changed the definition of air carrier operations to include eVTOL. That's very exciting. Vertiport standards came out this year, at least, the engineering brief. I know there was additional guidance and direction on kind of certification for, eVTOLs and the training required. Big year. So I assume trajectory is going to just keep going upwards in 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you just ran through every talking point I had.
I'm sorry. I'll shut up. I need you to talk.
No, that's great. That's great, because that means, honestly, for me, it means that what we've been trying to do with our communications and getting the public to understand where the FAA is headed and where these eVTOL aircraft are going to be, it's working, because you understand all that stuff that we're coming up. But yeah, you got it exactly right, Don. So we We just amended Part 119, and what that means in plain language is that's the part that describes all the requirements you need to have to operate as a charter aircraft company or a scheduled airline service. So it kind of goes through all the administrative pieces of it. And adding powered lift aircraft to Part 119 was critical to get those eVTOLs in that regulatory permission set so that you can fly them under Part 135. You mentioned the certification of those aircraft. We're conducting that under our Part 23. And I think what's exciting for me is that we're not having to invent new rule sets to make this happen.
Right.
You remember when drones came on, we had to create a whole new rule set. We had to create Part 107. It had never been done before. That presents a tremendous amount of challenges for a regulatory agency. I think we did very well with that. And despite what some people might think, that rule came out relatively quickly, and it's pretty darn good. With eVTOL, we're fitting them into existing regulatory structure, and that's key. If we're talking about safe, efficient, and moving parts, getting those pieces of aircraft put together into the sky safely, that is key to have that fit into our existing regulation. We had to, as you mentioned, talk about the vertiports. Where are these eVTOL aircraft going to take off and land from? Is it going to be the same as a heliport? Is it going to be a little bit different? That engineering brief sort of laid the groundwork for a vertiport design, clearance, markings, the electric infrastructure. How are these aircraft going to be charged, assuming they're all electric powered?
Weather.
Yeah, right. How are they going to be charged at those eVTOL? But I think that it's important to note, as you pointed out, Don, it was an engineering brief. And the reason that is because the FAA always looks towards performance-based rulemaking, performance-based objectives. We're really trying to get away from, you need to check off boxes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that exact order, and then we'll consider approving your operation. What we're getting into now is more, hey, this is the framework. This is the safety framework your operation has to fit in, or this vertiport has to be maintained at. Tell us how you think you can do that best, and then we look at that. So that's a performance-based type operation. You're seeing it a little bit with our maintenance and aircraft certification. You're seeing it with our vertiports. So those two things, sort of that working towards a performance-based operation and fitting eVTOLs into existing regulation is really exciting. And that's as excited as I was about drones 5 years ago, I'm getting excited about eVTOLs. They're absolutely coming. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to change aviation.
Kevin, I actually got to see, and frankly, Dave wouldn't let me touch it, but I got to see an eVTOL aircraft in person live for the very first time when Archer revealed their Midnight aircraft in November. And oh my gosh, I was geeking out because just to see it in person, it was just so spectacular. And, you know, what we're observing is, you know, the money continues to flow into this, you know, eVTOL. Vertical Flight Society is up to over 700 like designs in their eVTOL directory. I mean, and continues to grow. So super exciting. And you're exactly right. No pun intended. The rubber meets the road on the ground. Where are these things going to take off and land? Speaking of which, we saw a lot of movement on the infrastructure side this year. You know, money coming from Congress, a lot of discussion about this. I think critical infrastructure with drones, grant money flowing down. But let's talk, PK, let's talk with you first. I know part of your efforts involve vertiports, drone ports, whatever those are. How is that going? Is there anything to report in that arena?
Well, we're definitely looking at architecture, what the architecture should look like at the drone port, as you call, for operating at that high density volume, you know. So we look at this as a complete picture, right? Aircraft, aerospace, and infrastructure or community. And our premise is that all three aspects have to evolve simultaneously. It doesn't do us any good if you have aircraft system ready, but aerospace is not, and aerospace system is ready, but communities are not, or vertiport standards are ready, but infrastructure is not able to get there. So building all those things together is what we're really after. And fundamentally, I'll elevate the discussion just on vertiport is looking at that architecture and saying, what is the roles and responsibilities to get to high density operation from very low density operation that we will expect as soon as certification is available. So that low density operation, getting there to high density operation, what would be the right architecture, information exchanges, automation on the aircraft, automation in the airspace system, as well as automation at the vertiport. That's going to be key. In the beginning, a lot of companies are focused on VFR, VMC operations. Well, that will not scale to get to and have persistent operations under IMC conditions. What
Right.
would be that interesting technology that we need on vertiports? How do we actually make those trades? What capability we need on vertiport itself, and what capability we need on the aircraft, and how they exchange that information so that they can continue the basically operations at rapid pace on a very frequent basis under IMC conditions. And so we're looking at all these aspects, and some of those will be researched and then will be demonstrated along the way in the national campaign. So more excitement to come, but currently we're focused on what is that initial architecture may look like, what information exchanges should look like, and how do we demonstrate that this will scale to the point where we will have all systems ready, so to speak. All systems go, right? I mean, that's how the
Right.
space goes. All
Yes.
systems go. How do we make sure that aircraft, airspace, and community integration and infrastructure is all go for advanced air mobility?
Well, that's key, and so many other layers to this. Use that onion analogy as you peel it back. Cybersecurity, counter drone for the clueless, careless criminal, and God forbid combatant. We don't want those on in the homeland, but you never know, right? So we're seeing a lot of that in the Ukraine with Russia, and privacy. So many layers, like you said, noise and community acceptance, all wrapped into this giant equation of the technologies needed. Kevin, they say if you build it, they will come. What do you need from industry, do you think? Like, a lot of different companies, a lot of different organizations are working with NASA on this R&D. What could the FAA use from industry to help them in this advanced air mobility space, in particular, like with infrastructure? Is there anything, if you had a wish list, you say, hey guys and gals, here's what we need from you?
Yeah, I think the most important thing moving forward when we're talking about any sort of new frontier, which is really what eVTOL is going to present to the American public, it's going to be continued collaboration. So my hope is that as we move forward, that we all continue to talk. I think having PK on and myself discussing what we're trying to do, you can see how just the paths of NASA and the FAA cross with this, but there's a lot more paths that also cross that eVTOL line. And I think as we go through the next year, 2 years, and move towards 2025 and beyond, I think we're going to need to continue that collaboration. It's important that we hear from industry. We recognize fully that the innovators are in industry, that the innovators and designers and engineers out there that are creating this future, they're the ones that are going to be the experts, and we will need to continue to communicate with them to ensure what they're designing fits into what we need, and we can keep our airspace system, which is the most complex in the world, but also the safest in the world. And that's ultimately our end goal. But to make that happen, folks like myself, PK, FAA, NASA, collaborating with industry, that's really going to be the key.
Well, and I noticed, I think it was this year, Kevin, that you all changed the name of the Drone Advisory Committee to the Advanced Aviation, is that's what it's called, right? Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, the ACC, or the AAAC, whatever, I don't know if people are actually calling it as an acronym, but I think that just little change there speaks volumes, just like last year, how you changed some of the terminology for diversity reasons. I thought that was really great. So maybe that is also a good segue a little bit to education, because you had talked about, hey, Don, you know all about this because we're clearly putting out good information, educating the masses about what we're doing. Tell us a little bit, Kevin, about what the FAA is doing on the educational side of the house, workforce development, other initiatives that really took off this year.
Yeah, so over the past year, our diversity, inclusion, and equity process has expanded, grown. We now have a dedicated website that talks all about the FAA's efforts in that inclusion arena, because I think that the wider net we are able to bring people in from, the broader our backgrounds, the better the experience is. I think that's critically important to aviation as we move forward, to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is all part of our operation moving forward. That's really key. So if you want to know more about the FAA's efforts, we do have our website up. It's got a lot of great information out there about the progress we had. I was just in a meeting this morning. We talked about our air traffic control hiring campaign. We had more applications than any other campaign we ever had, somewhere around 53,000, if I remember correctly. We also had the most diverse applicant pool we have ever had for air traffic control applicants. So I really feel like those DEI and A efforts are moving forward, and they're very, very successful here at the FAA. On the education side, we continue to get into the schools. I think that's going to be the key moving forward. Those kids that are in secondary schools or primary schools now, or at universities, those are going to be the kids that are going to be engineering and driving the future of AAM and innovation in this country when it comes to airspace. So our college training initiative program, our CTI schools that we do for UAS and education, that's been key, and that's going extremely well. I believe we're either at or just over 100 universities now, part of our CTI UAS initiative.
Wow.
So those programs, I think, are really key to not only diversity, equity, inclusion, but also getting the workforce we need to support this new frontier moving ahead.
No, I love that. And PK, you and I have talked about this because PK, I actually met you in person, I think, for the very first time last year at CES, Consumer Electronics Show, at the Women in Drones. At the time, it's called Women to Watch in UAS Awards. This year, it's called the Women in Emerging Technologies Awards, expanding, kind of opening the aperture there. But we talked about the importance of diversity, and Hui Tran was there, your director of the NASA Ames research, such an amazing and inspirational woman. NASA does so many incredible things in the education space, PK. April Lannett, who's right here in Colorado, you were there because basically celebrating her win as the for the education award last year. And you guys put out that comic book that had the first little girl, like astronaut of color, like just so many great things. Anything else like this year that you're super proud of that NASA did on the educational and workforce development side of the house?
Yeah, certainly. We have a whole, I will give two examples. We have a whole program activity called ULI, University Leadership Initiative. And we, although I'm personally not involved in that, but if people want to look it up, they can look it up, ULI, NASA ULI, and they awarded a number of grants and, many minority institutions, as well as women principal investigators. And we're tracking that very carefully to make sure that we have a good representation of society into the research. So that's one thing we are excited about. The second thing that I'm personally excited about and I'm involved with is Minority University Research and Education Program, MUREP. So we awarded 4 grants this year on aeronautics supply chain challenges. So schools will basically work with students as well as industry partners to build basically excitement around aeronautics supply chain and the opportunities. So there could be curriculum, there could be jobs, there could be business. But I personally see a tremendous opportunity to have aeronautics supply chain that could be strengthened for future needs, that include drone, advanced air mobility, supersonic, hypersonic, and on and on. And I think this is just great to see so much interest from universities and students, particularly minority universities, to bring them to basically emerging needs in the aerospace.
Oh, I love everything you're both saying. Drone delivery really has taken off. We really didn't talk about that, but like in the past 2 years, so much progress in that particular use case. Super exciting. All right, we're getting close to our time here. So let's see. Forecasting the future. We talked a little bit about this, but PK, I'm going to give each of you kind of a last word here, and then we'll talk about how folks can reach you. So PK, you first. What are you looking forward now as we ring in 2023, the new year.
Yeah, the 2023, yes, so exciting. I think you will see some good developments towards advanced air mobility, particularly the airspace. The moment we started with UTM on the third-party services and the characterization will continue. We will see some demonstrations through UTM field test and network USS and pieces that are finally beginning to mature across the globe, not just in the United States, but you'll see
Right.
tremendous progress on UTM across the globe, which is I'm really excited about it. I mean, small countries like Malawi are adopting UTM and for humanitarian needs supported by UNICEF. That's just so heartwarming to see that happening. So I think you are going to see a lot more excitement and a lot more people and entities that were not part of aviation before are going to be part of aviation because of these things that we're bringing forward and making awareness of where the needs are and opportunities are. And that is very exciting.
That's excellent. And Kevin, you're last. So what are you thinking 2023? Big picture.
Well, I think you touched on it, and it's something I think a lot of people have been anxiously awaiting for a long time. But I'm really excited to see how package delivery grows by drone in 2023. With 2022, we started to see airworthiness standards for drones come out. We saw some of the first airworthiness certificates issued for drones. So we're starting to see the turning point and the next horizon for drones, and that's going to be full operations under Part 135, including package delivery. So while it may not happen in 2023, part of me is kind of hopeful that we're going to start to see some repeated normalized drone delivery operations in 2023. So I don't know if that's going to bring you your pizza or your latest online purchase, but I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how that pans out, because I know one of the last hurdles was cleared this year with the airworthiness requirements. So that's really what I'm looking forward to seeing in the next year.
Well, and Kevin, we didn't talk about it all, but kind of huge. Matternet got that first type cert, and then they just on the heels of that got a production cert, and they've been doing drone delivery, so that bodes well for the industry. I posted up something on LinkedIn like, who's next? So really super exciting to see all that happening, and I'm really looking forward also to 2023. So Kevin, you first, then PK. How can people reach you? How can they find you?
Best way to find me is just go to fa.gov/UAS, go through our website. You can also follow us on social media. We have a couple of accounts dedicated to drones, FAA Drone Zone, that's both on Twitter and Facebook. And you can always email us at the support center, uashelp@faa.gov. Either one of those, if you ask for me, it'll find my way to my inbox, I promise.
Okay, very good. And how about you, PK?
Yeah, certainly all of the above. They can look at me up on Google, Parimal Kopardekar, NASA. You will see me many places, but my email is probably the best way, parimal.h.kopardekar@nasa.gov. I think also connect to LinkedIn and Facebook, Twitter, all those places, but NASA email is the best for professional things. And looking forward to basically collaborating with everyone. And Don, you do a great job with these shows, like really amazing, and you have an awesome follower, basically. So just exciting to see how your show has grown and how well it's accepted in the community and liked by everyone. So much success to you next year. I know it's going to be more and better and different, but looking forward to seeing that.
Well, that was very kind of you to say. That high praise coming from you, PK. I really appreciate that. And that's a great way really to wrap this up. As they say, mission accomplished with DroneLife. Thank you again. This is our last episode on DroneLife channels. We'll be migrating over to AUVSI next year. So check out their social media channels and stay tuned for more there. Thank you, Sage Tech Avionics, for sponsoring this month, the best of 2022. We are a wrap. Happy New Year, everybody. And all systems are go for 2023. We're out here.